Welcome to the Retiring Canada podcast, where our mission is to educate and empower you to make the most informed, rational, and productive financial decisions. Hosted by certified financial planner, author, and chartered investment manager Michael Isbister, you'll go behind the scenes to uncover the tips and strategies to help you invest smarter, optimize your retirement income, and reduce the amount of tax you pay. Michael is an investment advisor with Fundamental Wealth, a trade name of Harbourfront Wealth Management, an IROC dealer. And now, here's your host, Michael Isbister.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Retiring Canada podcast. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the do's and don'ts to naming beneficiaries on your retirement accounts and insurance policies. Now, I know this sounds thrilling, but you would be surprised how often we see these mistakes and how damaging they can be both emotionally and financially to your family when you're gone. Specifically, in today's podcast, we will be discussing 3 scenarios where naming a direct beneficiary can make some sense, the impact probate planning can have on your estate and family, scenarios where naming a direct beneficiary is strongly not advised, considerations when you have a dependent with a disability, factors to consider if you have a blended family, potential tax issues that can arise upon your passing, and lastly, as always, a few action items for you to consider. Okay, so let's start off with the scenarios where naming a direct beneficiary on your retirement accounts can make some sense. Now, when I say retirement accounts, I'm speaking specifically about your RRSPs, RIFs, defined contribution plans, etc. Now, the first scenario this would make sense would be individuals in their first marriage or relationship. In these cases, if the goal is to leave the entire estate to the surviving spouse, naming them as direct beneficiary can make some sense. However, if you have children from a previous relationship or a spouse or child with a disability, you'll want to rethink this strategy. More on those points in a bit. A second scenario is where an individual wants to leave their entire estate to one beneficiary, whether it be an only child or charity. Now, in this case, you should still consider the beneficiaries, their financial maturity, exposure to creditors, and whether or not they have a disability. The last scenario where a direct beneficiary can make sense is when there are concerns that the estate may be bankrupt or insolvent. If there is a desire to have assets pass outside of your estate in order to avoid future estate creditors, then you should speak to your estate lawyer or notary about how to structure your assets to better accomplish your estate planning objectives. Now, outside of these scenarios, beneficiary planning gets very murky. Oftentimes, there is a desire for families to avoid having their assets go through the estate so that they can save on probate. Now, probate fees can vary from province to province, and in Saskatchewan, probate fees represent $7 per thousand that goes through the estate. So as an example, on $1 million estate, this represents $7,000 in probate fees. And this may seem like a lot, but when you start to see how this probate planning can disinherit intended beneficiaries, cause unequal inheritances, and deepen family tension, you'll soon realize that probate planning can have some serious negative consequences. So let's continue to shift gears here and discuss the don'ts when it comes to naming direct beneficiaries. First and foremost is the naming of a minor beneficiary or young adult. In the simplest terms, imagine, if you will, that you have named a minor child as a beneficiary of one of your retirement accounts or insurance policies. Now, in the scenario where you pass away suddenly, the money cannot be given to the minor and must be held in trust until they reach the age of majority. Now, I know some of you will be thinking, well, that's okay, my spouse can help manage the funds until they reach maturity. Well, unfortunately, in most provinces, the surviving spouse does not have authority to manage the minor's assets. So unless the parent obtains a court order of financial guardianship over the child, the funds may have to be paid to the provincial authorities for them to be managed. Probably not what you were expecting. Now, even in the case of young adults, we all know plenty of people who would not be competent enough to manage a large sum of money, even when they are technically considered an adult. Honestly, when I think of myself when I was 21, I was in no way capable of handling a large sum of money, and there is no doubt in my mind I would have squandered my inheritance and probably got myself into a lot of trouble. So the answer here, it is probably best to name your estate as the beneficiary and then outline in your will to direct those funds to be held in trust for a minor or young adult until he or she is more mature. Okay, so the second scenario where naming a direct beneficiary is not recommended arises when naming a disabled beneficiary. First off, when a person with a disability inherits property directly, he or she may be subject to a clawback of provincial social assistance. I have come across this exact scenario where parents named their disabled son as direct beneficiary on their RRSP accounts. Now, their intentions were pure. They wanted to be sure their son had enough money to be cared for after they were gone. However, this action unqualified him from a provincial income grant that would have afforded him nearly $1,000 a month in living expenses. To compound this issue, a public trustee or government agency may be involved to manage the funds if the disabled person is mentally impaired or incapable of directing the money themselves. Now, if the person with a disability is only slightly mentally impaired and is capable of managing the funds, there is still a significant risk they become victim to a financial predator, both within and outside of the family, who would seek access to the money. A common approach to address these issues is to have accounts and policies paid to the estate and then adding direction in a discretionary trust, sometimes referred to as a Henson Trust, for the benefit of the disabled beneficiary. Not only does this setup help to avoid clawbacks and benefits, it also avoids the need for a public trustee and thwarts potential financial predators. Creating a trust also allows the ability to pay tax at graduated rates if the trust qualifies as a qualified disability trust under the Income Tax Act. This is significant as unqualified trusts pay tax at the highest marginal rate, not at the gradual rates. The next scenario where naming direct beneficiaries is not recommended is in the case of blended families. In these scenarios, it is crucial to structure the estate properly. If all of the assets are left to the surviving spouse, there is nothing forcing that spouse to maintain your wishes to provide an inheritance to the children from a previous marriage. Now, I'm not saying there is intent here to disinherit kids from a previous marriage, and it may very well be completely unintentional. For instance, in the case where the second spouse dies without a will, the courts do not recognize children from your spouse's previous marriage as receiving a portion of the final estate. The most common approach would be to pass along a portion of these assets at the first spouse's passing to have their naturally born children receive these funds while leaving the remainder of the estate to the surviving spouse. This is obviously a very oversimplified example, so please consult with a professional before implementing this and any other strategy discussed in today's episode. Also, if you're wanting some additional information on the unique planning aspects of blended families, please check out episode 2 of the podcast where I cover this topic in more detail. The last scenario that I will discuss today is the designation of multiple beneficiaries on a single account or insurance policy. In this case, if one of the beneficiaries predeceases you and then you were to pass, the family of the deceased beneficiary could be completely disinherited, which is probably not your intent. An example of this would be you naming your 2 adult children who have children of their own. If one of your children predeceases you, the grandchildren of your deceased child would be disinherited. Another detractor from naming multiple beneficiaries would be the potential negative tax consequences and inheritance issues. For example, let's assume you had no surviving spouse and you named your 2 adult children as beneficiaries on your RRSP or RIF account, say of, worth $500,000. At your passing, each of the beneficiaries would receive $250,000 free of tax. However, in the eyes of CRA, this $500,000 is considered fully taxable income to your final estate. If we assume a 50% marginal tax rate, this means your estate now owes $250,000 to the government. Now, if the executor was to go back to the beneficiaries to collect this tax owing of $125,000 each from them, how would that conversation go? What if one of the beneficiaries already spent the money? What happens to the beneficiaries named in the will and not the RRSP or RIF account as direct beneficiaries? Well, here's the rub. The estate is liable to pay the tax bill. So before any distributions from the estate can take place, this tax bill would have to be settled. As you can tell, this could have significant impact on your beneficiaries, the executors, family dynamics, and more. Now, there are a number of other scenarios where naming a direct beneficiary is strongly disencouraged, including secondary or contingent beneficiaries, and instances where the beneficiaries are exposed to creditors or a potential marital breakdown. All right, so that does it for today. I hope you received some value from today's show. Estate planning is one of those topics that can be difficult to talk about and sometimes maybe a little bit boring, I get it. At the end of the day, estate planning largely involves accepting your own mortality, which for some can be an extremely difficult topic to broach to begin with. But again, at the end of the day, putting your head in the sand and not making a plan will only hurt your loved ones more after your passing. Okay, so action items for today's show. First, it's time to look at your retirement account statements and look for potential issues. Do you have a minor set up as a beneficiary? Do you have a non-spouse set up as a beneficiary? How about a disabled beneficiary named in a policy or a retirement account? Number 2, dust off your will and have a look. Are the intentions of your will negatively impacting your direct beneficiaries? Are there children from a previous marriage that should be considered if you pass away first? And number 3, set aside some time and make updating your estate planning documents a priority. Although doing nothing is an option, the repercussions can have severe financial and emotional stress on your loved ones when you're gone. All right, so that does it for today. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review in your favorite podcast app. If you're really liking the content that I put out on a regular basis, you'll really enjoy the weekly Retiring Canada newsletter. So click the link in the description and join thousands of other retiring Canadians to get the most recent retirement planning updates. And hey, when it comes to your retirement, don't take chances. Make a plan so you can retire with confidence.
All comments are of a general nature and should not be relied upon as individual advice. The views and opinions expressed in this commentary may not necessarily reflect those of Harbourfront Wealth Management. While every attempt is made to ensure accuracy, facts and figures are not guaranteed. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing or tax advice. Please seek advice from your accountant regarding anything raised in the content of the podcast regarding your individual tax situation. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.